everyone. This is the Red Group presentation. Before I begin, though, could I just offer thanks to the hosts who have looked after us fantastically with a fantastic... But it's been a good programme, but they've also looked after us very well, I think, materially and spiritually. We loved the music. So, we talked about being prepared for a road trip. And it is a road trip sponsored by the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And I have to say, powered in places by rather nice South African gin. Now, our conclusion was that it could be quite a journey and that a few signposts along the way would be very helpful. Now, a very significant part of our message is that we probably will need to do a little bit of restructuring of our organisations, and particularly we thought our recognition and reward systems to make sure that we were aligned with the world of the Fourth Industrial Revolution and not aligned with things dating back to medieval Spain or England. Now, among the examples we talked about were balances between teaching and research in terms of academic workload, and we also spent a little bit of time talking about the balance between business as usual type activities and innovation, and whether we were recognising and rewarding in the right balance. Now, among the things that we thought we would encounter on our road trip were a further decline in public funding of universities and very possibly a continued decline in trust, and in some cases even hostility. We wondered about too much online undermining the value proposition that we generally have of a campus-based face-to-face experience. We wondered about rapidly growing numbers of ed tech companies that we would surely encounter along the road. We wondered about disruption from micro-credentials. We wondered about research disruption and how we would encounter that. And we thought we would face continuing difficulties of scaling the things that we would most like to continue being part of our value proposition, such as personalised research experiences or internships. Now, although that we have not really finessed this, there are two very significant directional signs that began to appear on our radar. The first one is, when you're starting off on a journey, it's probably good that you know who you are so as your parents can return you if you get lost. So who are we? We are research-connected universities offering very high-quality education. So secondly, and also a little bit of a component of who we are, is an understanding of guiding values. And it is important to stress here that we felt this was a recommitment to guiding values, because we actually think our guiding values are pretty robust. So we thought we were about a commitment to truth and a recommitment to freedom of ideas. We thought we were about globalisation, but we thought it needed to be a slightly more nuanced and certainly more inclusive form of globalisation than just the mantra of internationalise the curriculum. And we thought globalisation needed to be very overtly incorporating of Indigenous knowledges. And equity and diversity. Now, we had a couple of other road signs that I'll run through very, very, very briefly. They're not in any particular order. But the first one, we had to recognise that we had fellow travellers. And of course, we have students and staff, and this relates to the second theme that we talked about. And we were very influenced, Gregor, by your different cohorts. So we knew that there would be different cohorts with very complex needs, and that is students and staff. But we thought we needed to keep a focus on people to, as you can see, prevent them falling in something not very nice. But there are also different sorts of fellow travellers that we will need to interact with. We've got service providers, we've got the ed tech suppliers that I mentioned earlier on, industry, accrediting bodies, government, lots of others. Now, we thought that some of these could be good, but we also thought that some of them we needed to be very cautious of. So this is our road sign, beware the crocodile. On a similar theme, there were other dangers that we saw along the road, but we didn't want to get overwhelmed by those dangers, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, one of the things that we talked about was our institutions needing to be agile. So one of the things we thought we might meet along the road was a sloth. So we need to beware of sloths crossing the road. But actually, we decided that in the end, we would be optimistic, because actually our universities have an unbelievable record in jumping over obstacles. Now, finally, for us, you'll notice that although we're on a road trip, we haven't stipulated where we're going to arrive. So for us, the big road sign is don't stop, because the next one will be powered by the 5th Industrial Revolution. And we absolutely hope that will also be fueled by South African gin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not a big fan, or I haven't really drunk South African gin, so I think I should try that. And I hear that it's actually very nice. Okay, so I've learned something about my own country and the delicacies and good things that I haven't experienced. Gin is on my list. So could I invite the next group? Whichever group? Great.
Myself. So, just see, that's kind of.
Would you like to be there?
Yeah, I would actually. That would be better. Great, thanks. So I'm going to report back from the Orange Group, and I suppose just to give you a quick outline, I suppose, of who is in our group to start with. So we're facilitated, thank you, by Thea, who's here in front of me, and then we also had Sally. Who resonated with some of the stuff that she spoke about this morning, was very useful in our group from an industry perspective. Bo Anders from Lund, Gregor from Melbourne, Yusuke from Waseda, and Hussein from Johannesburg. So that was our group. And we had really quite a wide-ranging set of discussions over the couple of days, identifying common challenges and opportunities arising from the 4th Industrial Revolution. We did come back with some common themes and principles that I outlined to you, but I suppose we also were conscious in our conversations that any roadmap or series of our way forward for U21 would need to recognise, I suppose, regional and contextual factors that would impact on different institutions in different ways. And that was quite apparent in our conversation around capacities, availability, resources, different demands, and indeed, Sally, your presentation highlighted very clear differences regionally and context-wise, that whilst there are common pieces, would be different for our institutions going forward. So what we have were a series of guiding principles as a starting point for a U21 roadmap. And I suppose the first one, the last group touched on very much, I suppose, notwithstanding significant changes in many graduate level occupations and professions, as institutions we need to continue to clearly articulate the unique value of a university education, and particularly the undergraduate campus-based education, which with the emphasis on a contribution to civic society, which goes well beyond training and skills development for employment. And we were reminded of the work that had been done 2 years ago in Birmingham, where we did produce a value proposition statement, and not to become distracted in some ways entirely by what's coming down the track here, in losing sight of what is the unique value of the education and the importance of being able to articulate that and communicate that very clearly. So it's not enough to know it ourselves, but we need to be able to articulate that. So I suppose that was our starting position, is that unique value piece. I suppose we also, although all of our institutions are engaged and aware of lifelong learning and CPD and the needs in that space, we felt certainly we need to embrace and invest much more in that new reality of lifelong learning and the growing demand for CPD and upskilling. So there was a space where we certainly needed to invest further. And I suppose aligned to that, or with that, recognise and understand the changing HE landscape and the emergence of multiple private and alternative providers. So we aren't the only people in this space. Indeed, we haven't been for a long time, but that's certainly becoming increasingly apparent. I suppose linked to that, and it was again a point that Joanne's group touched on, was the importance of treating different types of provision, such as a CPD provision post-graduation or a wholly online provision, as different business models for higher education. And so we couldn't shoehorn those types of provisions into the traditional academic and administrative structures that have worked very well for the standard 3 to 4 year undergraduate experience. That model simply doesn't work for other types of provision that are emerging and are required. We touched on, I suppose, the importance in whatever we do in this space, and increasingly the importance in all aspects of our provision around authenticity and authentic selection of both pedagogies and the incorporation of technology. So not for the sake of, but the importance of authentic learning experiences and the appropriate use of technologies aligned to both the disciplinary and industrial and regional contexts, so that it's contextualized. We also talked about, I suppose, another principle was around taking a strategic approach to identifying areas of learning where we're confident in our expertise and capacity. And so owning that space and saying we're expert in this space and owning it and taking it, but also identifying other areas where a partnership approach with industry or with business would be mutually beneficial and the way to go. So there was something around us knowing where our strengths were, and then also being open to partnership models with industry and with other providers. We did, I think, a number of conversations over the last couple of days has talked about the importance of supporting the wider university community, both our staff and students, and Joanne's analogy around bringing them on the journey with us to become digitally confident and fluent and competent in this space. We touched on, in a variety of ways in our conversation, around making equity, inclusion and diversity a continued priority as we move forward. The and this very much comes with the influence actually of Sally in our group, which was really useful because it was a very different perspective around building on existing quality assurance frameworks to ensure that we can vouch for the quality assurance of all of our offerings, both the well-established traditional programs, which of course are well set out benchmarked against various quality frameworks, but also emergent offerings and micro-credentials. So we need to leverage that, and the potential of leveraging indeed the U21 brand as a quality mark in some of those other spaces where in fact perhaps there isn't the same well-established, robust quality assurance frameworks in place, and a very busy provision that we might need to look at that in that space. I suppose we also talked about leveraging the wider staff resource or base in our institutions. So I suppose that the alarm bell started to ring at some level around, is this more stuff for faculty to do, more types of provision, more types of ways of working? And I suppose a sense of, in fact, that there's a wider base of colleagues and increasingly specialist colleagues in our institutions, like our education technologists, the role of librarians, the role of career advisors. So there's a whole range of other people who support the student and learning experience, and that capacity could be better leveraged in the context of designing a whole range of other types of provisions and being ready for a fourth industrial revolution. And then I suppose our last point, I suppose, was looking back to the U21 piece in the space of something perhaps quite concrete, was to explore the potential of developing, I suppose, a shared catalogue of online academic development resources. So remind a little bit of the reference this morning to the all staff needing to upskill, and how would our institutions do that? Conscious that people feel already in many ways overburdened and time poor. And so the potential that we could develop a shared catalogue of online academic development resources aligned to some kind of peer review quality assurance framework within our own U21 network, that would support our own staff and faculty to upskill in emergent areas. So that was kind of, if I can, is there anything from our group that I missed in terms of what we got to? No? Oh, thanks, Paul. Yeah.
So there was a clear affirmation. Excellent. So we are now awaiting the next group.
So we were the pink group, I think. I don't think we had a dispute over the colour of the label on our badge. I've decided we were the pink group. We don't have a roadmap as such, but we have about 6 broad points, which I will loosely relate to the road and the journey that we're on. And we do know where we're starting from, so much like the first group. We kind of wanted to restate the core purpose of what it is that we've been doing for a very long time, in many cases that we still think is highly valuable, and that is the research-led education that we offer in research-intensive environments. That we do offer higher level skills, and that the research and the inquiry and the creativity and the innovation and so many of the things that our students actually are doing remain fundamental and of central value to what it is that the demands of the fourth industrial revolution are looking for. But we do think that we need to be clearer about how our curricula that we have at the moment, and as they develop, do in fact develop students' potential. And we talked about how students have different potentials, and it's not just a homogenous group with a homogenous potential. And that we need to look at how we are developing their skills, how we make it clear to them what skills they're developing, and more emphasis on the broader meta skills that people have talked about. We thought there was some value in considering what we do through the 4 C's lens that have been mentioned a few times, but that they do need to be unpacked and made quite very clear where they're located within the curriculum. We talked quite a bit about co-curricular activity, especially for students who can't travel, but also Barbara was sharing research that shows that the students who are best able to reflect on their abilities are actually PhD students. So when we're dealing with undergraduate and to some extent postgraduate populations, we really need to support them in reflecting on and articulating what they're learning. So mentoring remains, and face-to-face mentoring, we talked a lot about the face-to-face value of the campus experience, remains important to help them see, recognise and learn from the experiences that they're having. In terms of the who, so what did we think students value? We thought that was an important question. So making a difference, more and more of our students are really clear that they want to make a difference in the world, so we need to support them to see the value of what they are doing and what they are learning, with a view to how they can make a valuable contribution when they graduate, but also while they are studying. And we covered some of those areas, would be sustainability, climate change in particular, and social impact. We've talked a bit about widening inequalities and how sometimes technology drives that. It doesn't actually reduce them. So these are important themes that we think need to feature. We think that students value meaningful experiential learning and relevant assessment. So we've talked about authentic assessment, but it does mean repurposing some of what we do. But it might not be as dramatic as we sometimes think. Sometimes just being a bit more creative about what it is we're assessing and communicating that better to students is actually also a big step in the right direction. We've talked a lot about students being treated and supported as individuals, but also being part of a cohort. So they want a social experience, they want to be connected to others, that might be physically or virtually, but they still also want to be understood as an individual. The cohort of one was an interesting concept. A cohort of one and a cohort of however many, 2,000 for some of you is a very large scale organisations. And just again, that point about having different potentials. In terms of how, what did we think we needed to do more of? So we said we thought we need more opportunities for experiential learning, but in particular disruptive learning experiences. So I'll come back to that in a second. And connected inquiry that ties in those grand challenges. How are we supporting students through their learning to see how what they're doing does relate to those big questions of climate change or inequality in society? Hold on a second, I've lost my place now. Where was I? Yeah, we did think that students tend to play it safe. They pick courses or they pick assessment strategies that are familiar to them from school. So we also need to give them opportunities to try things and to fail safe. And there were some good examples from Tech de Monterey about how that can happen very early on, so that they learn how to work in groups. They learn how to do the things that don't come naturally to them, but without high stakes attached to that. We talked a lot about navigating them, and we talked about ensuring that we engage with them, with alumni, both within the curriculum, but also to support lifelong learning. So what does this mean for us in terms of change? Well, probably some more systemic change, to have coherence across institutions, but we find that difficult, particularly in large, devolved organisations, particularly where they've had customs and practice for a long time. So we talked about if we want people to change, we need to change the environment in which they operate, and the incentives, and other groups have already covered that, to reward the kind of behaviour that we're looking for. We will always have our early adopters, but it's the big chunk of people in the middle ground who we really need to support. And we also talked about not being able to rely on the lone stars. Our reward and recognition also need to change, and I won't repeat what others have said. But we also talked about the concept of classroom activity changing. The answer, more academics, isn't really the answer. We need to think more creatively about what is a programme team, what's a course team, what skills do we need, and do we need effective learning advisors in the class to help students articulate the skills they're learning as they're learning them in situ, rather than as a support service later on, for example. We had some ugly things, to draw on an expression from someone in the group, or you might say some ditches in the roadside. All of this comes at a cost, and I think something we don't always explore fully is the investment that institutions need to make when we want to do this kind of wholesale change. And to sustain some of the activity, we can pilot innovations in technology, but actually scaling them up and rolling them out does cost, and we need to be quite upfront about that. And our institutional responses are shaped by what governments fund, what policymakers direct us towards. So there's always that trade-off, or trying to reconcile those different imperatives. And also our academics are often rewarded for individual behaviours and individual success rather than collective success, which is another challenge we need to look at. And just to finish, we have some questions. Maybe you want to call them road signs. Questions along the way. So the questions we raised that we didn't answer were, how do we ensure that when we address all of these challenges, that we bring together research and teaching? in our research intensives. And we also refer to the U21 statement about the value of research intensive education. How do we make sure we don't end up with the teachers who teach and do curriculum and all of that stuff, and the researchers who do other things? There's a potential for that to split off in our institutions. We asked the question about how do we make sure students have more involvement in shaping and articulating the value of their learning. We've all talked about the criticism in society about higher education and experts and what it's all for. We need to support our students in articulating the value of why they're at university and what benefit that is to them. And one question which Barbara asked of us at the end was, how can the U21 network support all of us? And Anya's already touched that a little bit in her presentation, but I think there's still a question for us as a group as to how we work together to best effect to share our experiences and our case studies to help us along this journey, which is going to have a big impact on us all in many ways, shapes and forms. So sorry there was no performative dance. Wasn't going to sing, but hopefully I have represented the views of the group, and if anybody feels I've missed anything out, do you want to add? I think I can see just about where everyone is. Is that okay? Okay, thank you.
So we had affirmation also here, wonderful. So it seems to be going very well in terms of representing the discussions in the groups. Last group? Is it? Yeah. It is the last group. We've represented all the colors now.
Hi, so I am representing the yellow group, and very much a lot of what's already been said we also discussed as a group, but I'll just touch on a few other things. The first thing, in terms of future configurations and challenges, we began by talking a bit about Shan's presentation. We thought that really resonated with us as a group, that rather than thinking about we need to do this and we will have this put upon us, that we very much should take ownership of this change and shape that change. So we're disrupting rather than being disrupted. In terms of the configuration of the university, we all agreed that there's definitely value in the university, and same as the other groups felt that the on-campus experience was here to stay and that students really value that on-campus experience. But in terms of some of these changes that are coming, some of the challenges we talked about were the student demographics. So we talk a lot about the on-campus students and the on-campus student experience, but we also need to think about the postgraduate student experience and whether that might be an off-campus, fully online experience, and how do we support that. And then we have this lifelong learners, these lifelong learners in CPD, and again, they're a different cohort, so we mustn't forget these groups. There's a huge focus on inclusion and diversity, and very much significant growth in recent years in online distance learning and lifelong learning, and then this recent move towards micro-credentialing, and that's quite a challenge actually for educational institutions to provide this in terms of the practicalities and the logistics. There's a huge focus on employability. We've heard a lot about that today, and making our curricula global and international, multidisciplinary as well. So in terms of technology, it's clear that there are huge changes in how we use technology. If we think back even to 10 years ago, we all use technology much, much more in our daily lives. That's only going to continue. Digital is now expected, and it's not necessarily when we talk about digital that we just think about the ed tech. We've got to think about all of the digital systems that support the student experience. And I think, and I'm generalizing here, but our IT systems that do that are not often matched in terms of functionality, intuitiveness, compared to, say, the types of technologies that students would use in their everyday life or what we use in our everyday life. But we were very sure about in terms of the ed tech, it should be the educators that drive that and not the IT. So it's not us, making use of systems, but it's us looking at what systems, first of all, what do we need to do and how can we support that through technology. We discussed quite a bit, actually, and I think this is really true, that, change is not new. We change all the time. We need to establish what our core values are, and have they changed, and do we need to adapt them? And that actually, yes, as a sector, we are slow to change, but sometimes that's not a bad thing. So, for example, yes, we very much need to look at what employers and the skills required to go straight into the workplace, but we mustn't do that and forget all of the other skills that students develop in the university environment. In terms of the future, will the traditional degree exist? We all agreed yes, but there was some mention and some really good examples of these additional learning experiences, whether they are additional on campus or online, for more further skills development and using the just-in-time model. But we do all recognise that we now have different cohorts of students, and I'd say probably more so now than we have in the past. Our unique selling point is that we are research-intensive universities, and in our research work, we're very good at collaborating globally and being interdisciplinary. But the challenge is, how do we extend that to teaching? And are we actually, where we think we're delivering interdisciplinary teaching, are we actually achieving that? So we felt that we needed to work together to rationalise and collaborate, very much following the same discussions the previous groups have had, and with a key focus on developing communities of learners, and perhaps educational technology could help with that. But we were very, very clear that educational technology is around about enhancing the student experience and further supporting collaboration and learning, as opposed to completely replacing. We also talked about maintaining academic standards, so I won't say much more about that because other groups have talked about that. The student voice should very much be at the forefront of everything that we do. There's definitely been a change, I feel, and the group talked about this, that students' expectations of support have changed, they've increased, they have more complex needs, and they are also expect, a much faster response to those needs. So responsiveness is important, and that brought us on to say, are we moving to a 24/7 university? And we didn't have the answer to that. So what can we do as a group? So I think we're in a unique position. We are research-intensive universities. We'll continue to develop that traditional on-campus experience and that research-led teaching. We all have I think it's clear that we all have a shared vision around social justice and diversity of the student body, and that we want to have a local and a global impact. So we're all looking to achieve the same thing. Change is inevitable. As I said, it's not new, but it does affect everyone. So it affects academics, it affects the students, and it affects the professional services staff. And very much to Moira's point around, it's really important that if we want to make these changes, we have to support these groups of people. But we have a unique opportunity to work together, to respond to these challenges, and also to shape the future. We have a fantastic staff network, but as a group, we felt that we could extend that and think about how can we set up student networks. So we've got good diversity across our institutions, and we could harness this to help each other. So building on some of the ideas around us supporting developing our staff, we could bring our students together potentially as well. We could have global communities of learners where there's diversity, there's inclusion, and there's collaboration. And just to finish, to say, I think we just need to embrace the changes, but choose to shape the future rather than have these changes forced upon us.
May I invite any questions or to you all that you might have? Questions that you would like to pose still at this stage that you think we need to think about, or any comments that you would like to add? Something that you think was not addressed that is burning? Nothing? Okay. While I was listening also, I walked around in the groups and also today, and something that struck me that I often heard was as a refrain is the importance to maintain what we are as universities and what is the value that universities, particularly for our on-campus students, can add that no other training can provide. So preserving the core of the university was for me a theme that I heard, but also simultaneously that we need to be agile, that we also need to understand the environment in which we are doing our education and the needs of the environment, and the challenge is probably how to bring the two together. And I then thought of a quote that I read recently. The change that comes first to mind is the industrial one. Science-based inventions have utilized the forces of nature on a vast and inexpensive scale. The growth of a worldwide market as the object of production, of vast manufacturing centers to supply this market, of cheap and rapid means of communication and distribution between all its parts. One can hardly believe that there has been a revolution in all of history, so rapid, so extensive, so complete, that this revolution should not affect education in some other form other than a formal and superficial fashion is inconceivable. Let me read the last sentence again. That this revolution should not affect education in some other than a formal and superficial fashion is inconceivable. And this was written by John Dewey in 1907. And I think that underlines the more the world changes, the more it also stays the same. But on the other hand, that we constantly need also to be aware that the role of education is to preserve on the one hand, but also to shape the future, as we heard today. Now, before I give over to the colleagues who are going to do the wrapping up, I would appreciate if you could allow me just to make say a few thank yous from my side. First, I want to start by thanking the Education and Innovation Steering Committee for their inputs in putting all of this together, for the wisdom from this committee. And then specifically also Professor Redmond and the team for guiding us. We had regular conversations, and those conversations were very useful and reminding us about small things that you might forget when you put together this program. So, Barbara, thank you very, very much. And also, please express our appreciation to your team, to Sally and others who worked with us. We appreciate that very much. I also want to express my appreciation to Barbara. You saw in your file that you received the sort of postcard. And that postcard identified that Barbara and colleagues decided, instead of giving you each a little small gift, that there was a donation given to our school at our Soweto campus, the Funda Archabuli School. We are raising money at the moment to buy new computers for the school. And this is highly, highly appreciated. We really appreciate this gesture, Barbara, and thank you very, very much for that. I also need to thank the UJ team. You all know who you are. I'm not going to mention you all who made inputs in very different ways. But please allow me to single out two people who really did such a lot of work and without whom this could not have been put together in the way it was. And the first one is Ishmael there at the back. Ishmael, if you could stand up and thank you. And the second one is Francie. Francie, thank you very much. To both of them, they were so trustworthy and dependable and attention to detail and reminding me very subtly, but have you remembered about this and that and the following? And I really, really appreciate this very, very much. Thank you, colleagues, for the work that you've done. We are very thankful. I also think we need to mention the School for Tourism and Hospitality. I think you would agree with me what they put together for us during these few days was really exceptional. So I will also write to the director to express our appreciation. And then to you all, what a pleasure it was to host you here. For some of you, it was your first time that you visited UJ and visited South Africa. Hopefully, definitely not the last time. When I say goodbye to you, I will say a little bit more about that. And then, before I give over to Gregor and Barbara, we are very proactive at UJ. You saw that you were given popcorn, and you might have wondered, why are we receiving popcorn? Well, you will see a little bit of a movie later. So that was just to entice you for the movie. So get ready in a while also for the movie that you are going to see. Okay. Barbara. Okay, Gregor, if you could come, and then we'll give over to Barbara. Yeah,
what
sure.
turn?
Yes, please do.
Can you hold that for just a second? I'll just see if I can.
No, I'm sure we can take this away now. We don't need it in.
Barbara needs it, I think.
Oh, Barbara, you need it. Yeah.
I can do this though. So my task is to really stand in for Kathy and do a bit of a summing up, which is a little bit difficult because the four groups have completely stolen my thunder in summing up. So I'm going to be a little bit repetitive. I, of course, didn't know what they were going to say. And really what I was doing is looking across the presentations over the last couple of days. And what I've done is tried to pull out 6 themes. I like 6s. 6 themes that I think might help us with the roadmap that we're going to produce. The first theme is lean into the 4th industrial revolution. This came up in a number of the talks. I think that one of the messages that has come through in the last couple of days is that there's this thing out there, which is the 4th industrial revolution, but we can do it on our own terms. We can control this. I think this came through with particularly Sian's introduction to the symposium, with her rejection of technological determinism, with her encouragement for us to be a bit more critical about the 4th industrial revolution. Who frames the way the future unfolds is what she said, and can we have agency over that future, which I think are worth reflecting upon. The Deputy Minister also touched on this. Do we see this, what is coming towards us, as a risk or an opportunity? Do we approach this, as he said, from a position of fear or a position of opportunity? So in a sense, I think that it's an encouragement for us to lead this conversation and not follow it, which I think is entirely appropriate for the kind of institutions that we are. And the Vice-Chancellor of UJ challenged us to draw on our strengths in this area. We are researchers, we are research institutions. to draw on that strength and provide an evidence base for what we're going to do in this landscape and what we can do as individual institutions and across the network of U21. The second theme is adaptive and agile. Many groups have touched on this. Universities need to adapt to change. Again, the VC, the Vice-Chancellor said, not all universities will thrive. It will be the ones that are adaptive that will. So there's a sense that we can't bury our heads in the sand, notwithstanding my comments about the first theme, and a sense that while things are currently working with our delivery of education, these same things might not work in the future for new ways of delivering. Numbers of areas are implicated in this: teaching, learning, assessment, credentialing, partnerships, staff development. The list would go on and on. The third area is existential position and positioning. This comes from a number of the talks. Rory, Zach, Sally, and certainly my own presentation touched on this. So in the context of the fourth industrial revolution, there's a strong sense in some of those presentations. You got a bit of it from Sally this morning and certainly from Zach, Rory as well, I think. A strong sense that we're being somehow undermined. And in that, and it came through in a number of the presentations, that is encouraged us, I think in a really useful way and pleasing for me, about thinking about what we stand for, you know, the mind, money and marriage thing. And if the narrative of employability and skills training were a very considerable part of our conversation over the last couple of days, but I think that what we sort of saw from the presentations is that why universities exist? And I think that the answer from the themes that are coming out from the presentations from the groups was indicating that not. So what options do we want to embrace in terms of the degrees that we teach, in terms of how we teach, learn, assess and credential? And part of this existential positioning of the university is, from our discussion, there was a strong sense of competition from outside the world of the university. And what does that mean for us in, as Sally said, and I think one of the groups said, staking our own claim in that landscape, while at the same time being open to collaborative possibilities among ourselves as institutional members, with other higher education providers and with external organisations. I was struck by what Sally said in her talk. We are trying to highlight the skills gap that is a result of the fourth industrial revolution, but we are not the ones that are going to plug it. So that puts it back on us a little bit. The fourth one was wicked problems, and I struggled with this. The VC mentioned it and the Deputy Minister mentioned it. There's something about the fourth industrial revolution might provide us with opportunities, and our universities, our students, in attacking the wicked problems that face the world. So there's something about combining the affordances of these mind-blowing and exciting and emerging technologies with multi and interdisciplinary approaches that exist within our universities that actually might push us forward to solve some of the big issues: climate change, food security, xenophobia, whatever it is. And it's the multi and interdisciplinary approaches in the context of the fourth industrial revolution that are our strength. And if we're really to do this, I think this came through in the conversation, if we're really to exploit something like the Internet of Things, then we've got to understand both the internet and the things. If we're really to exploit artificial intelligence, it's about understanding the artificial, but it's also understanding the intelligence. So this is a somewhat obvious idea, but I think something that we should remind ourselves of, that the fourth industrial revolution is not a technological phenomenon. It's much broader than that. It's a social cultural issue that we face, and we're well placed to respond to that. And a second angle on this, which I'll just leave hanging in the air, is, oddly enough, the fourth industrial revolution is itself a wicked problem. So that might be one for self-reflection. The fifth one is digital curriculum coherence. I think the fourth industrial revolution challenges us, and it came up again and again in our conversations about the way in which digital technologies can, should, or should not be inculcated in curriculum and delivery. So Zach and Thea, Hussein, Melissa's blended learning approaches, Ricky's multiple examples, and quoting him, low tech but high energy, TC Pong's challenging us to think how to learn and what to learn in Industry 4.0. All of these presentations touched on the theme of digital curriculum coherence. There are a couple of angles on this, and perhaps an outcome of our discussions over the last couple of days and something that maybe can go into a roadmap, is how to draw these together in a more coherent narrative of the focus and the features of digital curriculum in the university. I'm not being overly critical, but I think that there was a few divergent pathways here that need to be drawn together. Is the focus about developing students' skills of digital fluency? Is it a call to arms about using digital generally in our delivery, blended and online? The critical me would say, have we not been here before? Haven't we done this? I recognise this, but I also recognise that I have a particular stance and background. Or is it something about ensuring we're offering programs that use the technologies and preparing for the tech future? So in effect, should we use more AI, Internet of Things, VR, big data, blockchain? I'm not so sure about that one. For me, there was some slight, and ever so slight, techno-determinism in some of these conversations, which ran up against what Sian encouraged us to think about at the start of the symposium and her call to arms. But equally, as you'd expect, there was some clarity about the vision needing to be pedagogically led. There was plenty of talk of group work, authentic work, project work, collaboration, flipped classroom, active learning, and the list would go on. The final one, which I won't spend too much time on, but Mahathir, Hussain, Melissa all touched on this, which is internal development, and many of the groups mentioned this. Moving our institutions, adapting, changing, moving the whole curve of the institution requires considerable effort on development inside the university. Of course, our staff, but not just our academic staff, our professional staff as well, student development of infrastructure, and I expect processes and policies. And this across the network raises issues of equity, combating old issues of the digital divide. So, sorry, that was probably quite quick. These are the 6 themes. These are my thoughts and reflections on what I thought was a really useful and in many ways provocative conversation. And standing in for Kathy, I want to just thank Sarah and the team from UJ for hosting us and provoking us in that conversation. It's really useful. Thank you.